Hey, folks, from Anderson, South Carolina, Three Oaks, Michigan. I'm sorry that jumped past me there. Um, Antifa headquarters is here. I'm glad to see. La Grande, Oregon, Woodland Hills, California, Cincinnati, Ohio. Man, you have such a beautiful river in Cincinnati. And if you walk along it, I walked along, I guess it was last year, there is a space right by the city where it's dark. You can actually sort of imagine before there was a city there. And that reminds me of the 19th century and what an important place that was, because, of course, it marked the boundary between slavery and freedom. We're sitting here, Urbana, Illinois. We're sitting here. Oh, and Rhinebeck, New York. Dear friends in Rhinebeck. We're waiting for Facebook to come on here. We got San Francisco, a couple of people from San Francisco, St. Augustine. You should go to Fort Mose while you're down there. Wilmington, Delaware, Schenectady, St. Louis, Concord, New Hampshire, Parker, Colorado, Fairbanks, Alaska. Why was Fairbanks in the news? I just read an article about Fairbanks. Don't remember why. I mean, literally just like within the last 20 hours. Iowa City, Iowa, and it does not. Oh, Facebook is on. Hey, Liberal Rocks, how are you? Good to see you. All right. Today, I'm going to start someplace that you didn't ask me to start, but I thought it was actually surprisingly significant. And just so you know, today has been just a fire hose. And it's one of those days that are hard for me because the fire hose is coming from a lot of different directions. So it's hard to put all the pieces into a coherent story. And the reality is that I'm not going to be able to cover some of the stuff that happened today in tonight's letter because it's part of the thing about writing something. You kind of have to connect things or they don't make any sense to people. Similarly, there are many days when I don't cover two big stories on the same day because they cancel each other out. I'll save one for the next day. Anyway, the place I wanted to start today was something that a lot of people might not have noticed because there was so much else going on. And that's the fact that Vice President J.D. Vance was in Minnesota. He was in Minnesota to talk about law enforcement and to talk about the economy. He made an unfortunate gaffe then referring to the economy as the Titanic, which I don't think was what he wanted to say. But the reason I wanted to mention that is because J.D. Vance has been out front of everybody in trying to pick up the real right-wing MAGAs, the Groypers, the people who seem to have slid right even since the death of Charlie Kirk. And when Renee Good was murdered in early January, I believe it was January 7th, J.D. Vance was right out there, right in front of the administration, really blaming her for the shooting and suggesting that the law enforcement officer, the ICE agent, Jonathan Ross, who shot her, was acting in self-defense. And he was really aggressive about that. He's very belligerent about that. And he was out front about it a lot. So he sort of became the administration's face of elected officials being out in front on that issue. So today he went back, and while he still kept that baseline, he walked back some of the things that he said in early January. So, for example, he did admit that occasionally ICE officers have acted inappropriately, which before he wanted no part of. And he also flat out denied that he had said something on January 8th. He said on January 8th, I pulled this quote for you, "You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action," referring to Jonathan Ross, the man who shot Renee Good. "That's a federal issue. That guy's protected by absolute immunity." Well, he was not ever. That was just what J.D. Vance said. But today, he said this: "I didn't say that officers who engaged in wrongdoing would enjoy immunity. That's absurd. What I did say is that when federal law enforcement officers violate the law, that's typically something federal officials would look into. We don't want these guys to have kangaroo courts." That's something entirely different than he said just a few weeks ago. And the reason that I think that's significant, and everything that he was doing in Minnesota today was significant, was because I think it shows how enormously unpopular the actions of ICE and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol agents, are. And there was a new poll out today that showed, it was by Siena and the New York Times, and it shows that nearly two-thirds of Americans, 63% of Americans, disapprove of how ICE is handling its job, while only 36% approve. And even among white Americans, who are the backbone of the MAGA movement, 57% disapprove. Only 42% approve. And that includes Republicans, by the way. 19% of Republicans agree that ICE agents have gone too far. And they make up, as I say, the 61% of Americans who agree that ICE agents have gone too far. And what you're seeing, I think, increasingly is the MAGA Republicans losing on this issue. Joe Rogan, the podcaster, has compared ICE to the Gestapo. And the increasingly you're seeing pushback on the way ICE is behaving. I'm going to say a little bit more about the people doing that in a second. But last night we got a window, thanks to two whistleblowers who were working with Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat of Connecticut, into the way ICE is operating. And it turns out, according to these whistleblowers, that there is a secret memo that ICE supervisors have been using to justify breaking into people's homes without a judicial warrant, without a judge saying, okay, you can do that. This is a huge deal in neon lights, because the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. And that includes your papers, your information, but especially your home. And the protection of your home has always been central to that concept of the Fourth Amendment. This is really not controversial at all. Even the paperwork, the information from the Department of Homeland Security until very recently said up front, you have to have a judicial warrant to break into someone's home. They have written a new secret memo saying, actually, that's not true. So long as an ICE or an agent of the Department of Homeland Security signs off, that's okay. Well, this is a really big deal, because that whole idea of your home is your castle and all that idea that the government can't simply break into your home, that's something people care deeply about. And on Newsmax today, which is a right-wing show, their senior judicial analyst, a man named Andrew Napolitano, called that idea, the idea that ICE could break down your door and arrest people in your home without a judicial warrant, he called it, and I quote, a direct and profound violation of the Fourth Amendment, which expressly says people are entitled to be secure in their homes, and that security can only be invaded by a search warrant signed by a judge based on probable cause of a crime. That's a really big deal. And that's the sort of thing that, as people learn about it, they're not going to be happy with it, because that idea that the government can't break down your door is a really, really big one. Anyway, I think that Vance is there because the administration is really nervous about how their immigration policies are going. They are badly, badly underwater over them. But the reason I also started with that is because the issue of the administration and the story that they are trying to tell is very much in the news today, January 22nd, because Jack Smith, the former special counsel, was testifying before Congress. That's sort of the really big news today. And I wanted you to be aware, when you listen both to me, but also to everything that you're going to hear in the news about this, that Jack Smith, when he has testified before Congress, is under oath. He is under oath. If he lies, he can be picked up for perjury. All right. He is under oath. I cannot emphasize that enough. And if you remember back in 2020, if you were listening to me then, I kept talking about the fact that Rudy Giuliani was out there saying all kinds of crazy stuff. And he made it look like he was in court and all sorts of things, but he wasn't. He was just talking. And we have the right to talk in this country, even if it's not true with certain warnings, of course, with certain limits. But Jack Smith is testifying under oath. The members of Congress are not. Members of Congress are covered by what's called the speech and debate clause. It's in the Constitution, and it's designed to make sure that people are able to talk in our government without fear of reprisal from the administration. So you could stand up on the floor of Congress and say, I'm really unhappy, and I'm making this up, by the way. I'm really unhappy that the government is, I don't know, spending $1 gazillion on something that they're not supposed to, or that I don't think they should. Well, if you were a corrupt administration, you could throw those people in jail for bucking the administration. And this is what the speech and debate clause is designed to do, to protect that. Now, if you remember, the administration is currently going after a number of lawmakers, including Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, including Colorado Representative Jason Crow, including Senator Alyssa Slotkin, for them making a video reminding members of the military forces that they had a duty to refuse an illegal order. And one of the arguments behind their defense is, what are you talking about? Aside from the First Amendment, which covers us as well, we have the speech and debate clause. And Trump is clearly trying to go after this and trying to make it go away, but it is part of our Constitution. Nonetheless, it is worth remembering when you listen to anything that the people who are testifying before Congress, unless they explicitly make an exception, which they have recently in a couple of cases, they are testifying under oath. But in this case, the Republicans and the Democrats for that matter, but the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee can say whatever they want. They do not have to be telling the truth. They can straight up lie if they want to, because that is covered by the speech and debate clause. And I feel like that has caused a lot of confusion for people for a long time now. You sit there and you say, but my Congress critter says this. They can say whatever they want. And that's a really important distinction here, because what Smith was testifying about was his investigation and his final report into President Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And I will talk in just a second about his testimony to them. But just because I know it's been a long time, it's been 5 years, I'd like to remind people of what happened in the 2020 presidential election and remind people that there is no question, there is no question that Democrat Joe Biden won that election, and he won it by a lot. It was not a close vote. He won it by more than 7 million votes. He won it by a significant margin in the Electoral College. There really has been no question over this. And that's an important piece here. All right, so let me just explain to you very quickly what happened in 2020 for those of you who don't remember it. In the summer of 2020, Donald Trump started this major campaign to stop Republicans from using mail-in ballots. All right. And we have a lot of speculation about why he did this, but he convinced a lot of his own followers not to use mail-in ballots. Well, if you remember the fall of 2020, it was during the pandemic. So a huge number of people were going to be using mail-in ballots because you didn't want to be in crowded places. And, still, this is where disease happens, right? In crowded places. So have that there as a backstory. And then remember that on October 31st, 2020, there is a recording from that day in which a former advisor to Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, explained to a group of people that the Republicans were very aware that that Trump's numbers would be high early after the voting, because you're not allowed to announce any um, results of an election until after all the votes have happened. There's an interesting story behind why that is. But even if a state, and again, I'm making this up, but even if a state only had nothing but one party's ballots, you wouldn't be able to announce that until after the polls had closed across the country. All right, so Steve Bannon on October 31st, 2020, said to a group of people that the Republicans, the MAGA people, Trump's people, knew that votes for Biden would accumulate across the evening as mail-in ballots were opened and counted. And a number of states had actually passed laws that said they weren't allowed to open those mail-in ballots until after all the voting had happened. It wasn't that simply that they couldn't announce them, they couldn't actually start counting, which made them quite behind the game. And what Bannon said was that Trump planned simply to declare victory on election night, that he would seize the presidency before all those ballots came in. And then as they came in, he would say that any results to the contrary that said that he hadn't won the election were an attempt to steal the election from him. And here's a quote from Bannon. Bannon said, at 10 or 11 o'clock, Trump's going to walk in the Oval, tweet out, "I'm the winner, game over, suck on that." And then he went on to say, and what is anybody going to do about it? He doesn't need voters anymore after that. He's just going to steal the election. And that's kind of what happened early in the morning. And I don't remember exactly when now. Trump actually went on TV and he said, we need to stop the counting. We need to stop the election, the vote counting, because I won. I'm the winner. And I was up watching that and couldn't believe what I was seeing. But then that actually didn't hold. As the numbers came in, it was very clear that Biden had won the election. So then Trump tried a number of things after that. First of all, he challenged the election counts in a number of states, and that's legal. That happens not infrequently. Certainly if it's a close election. But first he challenged and demanded recounts in a bunch of places, got them. Once again, Biden had won. And then he started insisting to state officials that, in fact, the counts had been wrong, that he put pressure on them to say those counts had been wrong. And very famously, of course, he called Brad Raffensperger, who was the Secretary of State in Georgia, and said, I just want you to find me 11,780 votes, which was one more than they were down. And when Raffensperger was like, you're getting bad information, there was not fraud here, Trump also very famously appeared to threaten him with a criminal investigation for not cheating on those votes. So he's putting pressure on state officials to find those votes. He's challenging things in court. You've got people like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, two of his lawyers, out there claiming that there was fraud all over, although there was, again, they pretended like they were in court situations, but they weren't. They were just out there saying those things. And then when that didn't work, they came up with a different plan. And that was that they were going to create fake electoral slates. That is, when you vote for president, technically, you are voting for a series of electors. That's people in your community. And again, maybe someday I'll do one of these on the Electoral College, because the actual idea behind it was kind of cool. And the Constitutional Convention spent a great deal of time thinking about how to construct a system of electing a president that would not be susceptible to corruption. And what they came up with is the Electoral College. Now, one of the reasons I don't like Thomas Jefferson is because he bastardizes that in 1800 in order to win that year. And when he does so and creates the winner-take-all system, it really ends up perverting the system to the degree that James Madison actually is like, whoa, doggies, we can't do this. We need to amend the Constitution to go back to a proportional system of the Electoral College. Sorry about that little rabbit hole there. But the point is that you are electing a slate of electors. You're not technically electing a president. You're electing electors. And what happens now that we have a winner-take-all system in every state except Maine and Nebraska is that the electors will vote for, in the Electoral College, for whomever the majority of their state elects. So what the Trump people came up with was they would come up with an alternative slate of electors in the swing states that Biden had won. So they pulled together a bunch of people and got them to swear that they were the true electors and that the vote that had elected Biden was fraudulent. And they filed their own set of electoral votes. Now in America until 1887, off the top of my head, this would have been a real problem. This is how we get the contested election of 1876, because we didn't really have a system for working your way through that. We have that now. As I say, they cleaned up the system in 1887, I think it was, to make sure that what happened in 1876 didn't happen again. So those electors, those false slate of electors, were never legitimate. And the way that we process those, by the way, is that the state officials send them to the National Archives, which is one of the reasons a lot of people like me were extremely concerned when Trump 2.0 fired the National Archivist, who was a wonderful archivist, and replaced that archivist with Marco Rubio, who has a bunch of hats that we tend to forget about. There's an acting archivist right now as well, who is apparently doing the work, but they got rid of the nonpartisan archivist and replaced that person with a loyalist. Anyway, so it goes to the National Archives, and then there's an official slate of electors. So the argument was, what they were going to do was that when the joint session of Congress counts the electors, these are already certified. The states have certified them and said, yeah, these are real. But what the Trump people wanted was, they wanted, when the House and the Senate came together in a joint session to count those votes, which is really pro forma, they wanted Vice President Pence to get rid of the Biden slate of electors and pick the Trump slate. And Pence said, ain't happening. I am absolutely not going to do this. And you can attribute many reasons for why he may not have wanted to do this. But if the whole thing had gone south, who would have been the guilty party? I mean, I am absolutely not a lawyer, but man, you don't need a law degree to say, dude, that would have been a really bad thing to do. So what they came up with was a second plan, that if he wasn't going to do that, all they wanted him to do was say, two sets of slates of electors, I don't know which is the right one. I'm not going to count either of them. And what that would do was, it would have meant there were too few electors to actually elect a president. And when that happens, it gets thrown into the House of Representatives, which has only happened, I think, once in our history. But it's in the Constitution. It would get thrown in the House of Representatives, where each state gets a single vote. And because there were more Republican-dominated states than Democratic-dominated states in that period, right then, they would have elected Trump president. And Pence, this is why Trump wanted Pence so badly to say he would go along with it, because it all hinged on Pence. And there was even a move, if you remember, to get Pence to go somewhere else and let Chuck Grassley, the senator from Iowa, be the guy who did the counting, because he apparently was willing to go along with it. And that's where things stood on the morning of January 6th, which was the day all this was going to transpire. And of course, Pence kept saying, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And when he said that, Trump had a rally at the Ellipse. And he'd had all his supporters come to Washington, D.C. because it was going to be wild. At the Ellipse on January 6th, he told his people to march to the Capitol. And that's where we got the attack on the U.S. Capitol and the attempt to stop the counting of those certified electoral votes, with the idea that if you could slow it down, there might still be some way to make sure that there would not be enough votes counted for Biden and that Trump would stay in the election. All right. So then what happened was that The Department of Justice under Merrick Garland takes on what happened at the on January 6th, and they apparently used the 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 program, that's not the word, the plan, that they would get the small fry first with the like what when one is working against organized crime, you get the small fish first with the hope that some of them will turn on the hires up. And they started working their way up the scale, apparently planning to take a really long time at it. But of course, time clicked by, and Trump announced that he was running for president really, really, really early. And he did that pretty clearly because he wanted to make the argument that if anybody investigated him, they were trying to interfere with an election. And so you get, when that happened, Merrick Garland was like, well, I can't, I'm part of the DOJ. I can't continue to investigate Trump while he's running for office. And that's when he appoints Jack Smith, a special counsel. Jack Smith comes on and he just hones right in on Trump and on the people around Trump and tries to put together a case, because by now it's 2022, right? And you've got to get this wrapped up very quickly. He comes up with, he gets all the evidence he feels he needs. He takes it before a grand jury, and the grand jury indicts Trump on 4 counts. Now, there's 2 cases he's looking at. 2 issues he's looking at, but he indicts him on 4 counts. I'll tell you about the other case too. The other one is the fact that Trump carried top secret, extremely secret documents to Mar-a-Lago and refused to give them up. And that I may or may not have time to tell you more about that. Anyway, so he has this, and Trump immediately says, you can't get me for anything because I was president. And that's the case that goes before the Supreme Court. And Jack Smith goes to the Supreme Court and says, guys, rule on this now, because it's obviously going to come to you and we want to be able to move this forward. And the Supreme Court said, no, thanks. We'll let it move through the courts. And the courts slowed it down and slowed it down and slowed it down. And then it finally got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided it on the last possible day. That was July 1st. 2024. And by then you really are in the presidential the presidential campaign. And what the Supreme Court ruled was that a president could not be prosecuted for crimes committed as part of his official duties. That sent Jack Smith back to work, back to a grand jury with everything that might be an official duty stripped out, got another set of indictments and brought them forward. But by then, Trump had been reelected president or was about to be reelected president, and it never went to trial. So Jack Smith released in the beginning of January a report, a quite detailed report of the case that he believed and has said before Congress he still believes would have resulted in a conviction. Okay, that's the backstory for what happened. So on December, one of the things that has come out during this period since January is that the Jack Smith investigation and some of the investigation before it got a judicial warrant to get the toll records of calls of people that Trump called on January 6th and perhaps around January 6th as well. That's not the content. That is not the content. This is not wiretapping, which is what the Republicans are insisting. It is simply when the call started, when the call ended, and who were the people on, literally the one phone and the other phone. Who are the people on the call? Not what the content is. And that's really important, because when the Republicans in Congress found this out, they busted a gusset. They were incredibly, incredibly unhappy. And so they, first of all, went in front of the media and said, oh, they wiretapped us. They wiretapped us. This was illegal. The Democrats have run amok. They're using the Department of Justice against Republicans, on and on and on. That was not what happened. Very, very big difference. But what's really interesting is they insisted on calling the Republicans in the House Judiciary Committee. the chair of whom is Jim Jordan, a Republican of Ohio, insisted that Jack Smith come in and testify to them privately. And he said, no. Let's talk in public. I'm happy to come in, but I want to talk in public. And they said, nope, we want it private. So on December 17th, he went in and he testified before the House Judiciary Committee. And I found this absolutely fascinating. They released that transcript on New Year's Eve when ain't nobody watching the news, right? They released that transcript, and if you read the transcript, which takes a lot less time than you would think it would, it's much faster to read than it was 6 hours of testimony, I believe, but it reads really quickly. I think it's about 350 pages, 250 pages, no, something like that. It reads quickly. Not that I'm suggesting you have to do it, because I did it, and I'll tell you what's in it. The Republicans, as I say, led by Jordan, are frantic about those phone calls, frantic about them. Meanwhile, the Democrats are like talking about the fact that it's highly unusual that the Department of Justice is not releasing the second report that Jack Smith wrote. It released the first one under the Biden administration, but when it came time to release the second one, the judge in charge of that, Eileen Cannon, who was a Trump appointee, said, no, I don't think the people ought to see this. And that's really unusual. A special counsel's report is virtually always made public. I don't know of a case when it hasn't been. Maybe it is, but maybe there is one. But the Democrats are just like, did Merrick Garland tell you how to rule? No. Did you ever get into any interference? No. I mean, basically, they were establishing that he was very nonpartisan, and I actually found that really interesting because he did seem to me to be one of those people who is in service to the law, not to politics. And as I have said about the military and a lot of military leaders, I sort of feel a kindred spirit with them because my loyalty is to history. It's not to a political party. And theirs clearly is to the military. And Jack Smith, if you read his testimony, he's kind of not playing with anybody. He's really just answering to the law. Anyway, I found that really interesting because Jim Jordan was one of the people that Trump was acting really closely with. And now, of course, he's the head of the Judiciary Committee. So they released this testimony, and the House Judiciary Committee agreed to let Smith testify in public today. And that's what happened today. And that testimony, too, was really, really interesting. Once again, because Jack Smith was not playing with the Democrats or the Republicans. The Democrats were clearly trying to get him to say certain things, and he was not going to do it. And the Republicans were impugning his actions. He's incredibly highly regarded around the world. They were trying to suggest that he was deliberately trying to destroy Trump's chances of being reelected. They were really going after him. But again, what the Republicans were really pushing on was the idea of these toll records. And that I find really interesting because one of the things that he did say was that they were considering charging other people as well, as part of this attempt to defraud the American people and take away their right to have a say in their government, but that they had to stop the investigation because Trump got elected. And so it struck me that there are still concerns among people in power about the potential for lawsuits and for them being in legal trouble going forward. And that really showed up today while all this was going on, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller came out and posted on social media. Let me see if I can find it. Everyone serious understands that the justice system is rigged. And he, of course, means against people like him. Far left prosecutors, magistrates, judges, and juries unhesitatingly shield their violent activists and gleefully imprison their political opponents. By the way, a lot of you ask why I talk about Trump's social media account posting rather than him posting. And the reason for that is, I have said before, I am not convinced he does his own posting, but Stephen Miller's speech patterns are very distinctive. And I would suggest to you, if you read Trump's postings on occasion, they have similarly distinct speech patterns. If you listen to that, far left prosecutors, magistrates, judges, and juries unhesitatingly shield their violent activists and gleefully imprison their political opponents. There is a almost an iambic pentameter in some of that Trump doesn't usually do. Anyway, he says, unrigging the system is necessary for the survival of the republic, to which billionaire Elon Musk responded, absolutely. That says to me that they are very keen on making sure that that there isn't a free and fair justice system in this country, and they're afraid of what that a free and fair justice system might do to them. So that was really the big news today. And the reason that I tied that together with J.D. Vance at the beginning of all this is because the administration has been insisting that it can do whatever it wants, that it's acting extra constitutionally, and they're really the ones who are reclaiming the Department of Justice for, justice in the American way, when they are quite openly perverting it by threatening people like Jack Smith, who said he expects to be prosecuted for whatever they can find. Senator Mark Kelly, Representative Jason Crow, and Senator Alyssa Slotkin, and so on, and all the people that they have tried to prosecute to try and shut them up. And while they are doing that, at the same time, they're trying to accuse the Democrats of doing that. There are a few other things on the menu today that I wanted to just nod to at the very least. And that is, you have asked a lot about the Board of Peace and what is going on with that. There was a signing ceremony today at Davos where theoretically there is such a thing as the Board of Peace. I want to be very clear with you, that is not something that is legal in the American system. The Senate has to approve any treaties. End of discussion. It's in the Constitution. But again, the Trump administration has since the beginning been operating extra constitutionally. That is, as if there isn't a constitution. And Trump is pretty openly trying to replace the United Nations with his own Board of Peace. And that's interesting for a couple of reasons to me. One is because Trump, as you know, is falling apart mentally. He's really not in good shape. His speech at Davos was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and you can see he's sort of falling apart. He's got bad bruising on his left hand today, and White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said, "Oh, it's because he bumped it against a table." I mean, really, stuff is not in good shape there. And he is now the grand poobah of this Board of Peace that is supposed to essentially rule the world in his mind. He gets to announce his replacements, if there's ever a replacement. If you get permanent board members, they're supposed to give him $1 billion. I mean, there's all this stuff going on. And I wonder if that is designed to be a move that will promote him from the presidency, if you will, if he is no longer able to be president. Now he's got this to step into. But the other thing that happened at Davos was that Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, announced a plan for the reconstruction of Gaza. And the whole idea of a Board of Peace came actually from the idea of the UN that there should be a board to figure out how to rebuild Gaza. And I want to walk that back just a tad, because when the Biden administration was in place, there was, in fact, a move on the part of a number of Middle Eastern countries to pledge their support to rebuild Gaza, so long as there would be a new Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and also in Gaza that was not dominated by Hamas. They wanted Hamas gone. They wanted a new Palestinian Authority. But so long as that was there, they were willing to pledge billions of dollars to rebuild Gaza. This new plan announced by Kushner is essentially a real estate deal. They are looking to, as they said, transform Gaza into an economic hub in the Middle East. And they expect that it will cost a minimum of $25 billion that they are expecting that both governments and businesses will put in, and that it will become, a real estate paradise. I do not have time to go into what that means. But I promise you that the losers are the Palestinians, and the winners are the Kushners and the Trump family and the other people that they can get in on this. That is very much on the table here, in terms of the corruption that's involved, in terms of what Trump's Board of Peace was ever supposed to do. And it also speaks as well to this idea of getting rid of the rule of law and moving out beyond it, if you will, extra constitutionally, creating a world in which a few really, really, really rich people get to control everything. And the rest of us have to do what they say, whether it means having battering rams knocking down our doors. And that's happened recently with ICE. And they were at the wrong house. Whether it means that, whether it means being prosecuted for speaking out against the regime, whether it means having our foreign policy simply answer to whatever the president thinks he wants. Remember, Greenland 3 days ago was vital for our national security. Now he's changed his mind. That's the world that they are trying to create. But what really jumps out by the fact that Vance felt he had to go to Minnesota and try and push back against the objections to ICE is that the American people are saying, NFW, this is not what we want. And they're saying it in huge numbers, and they are organizing. If you look at what's happening in places like Minneapolis and St. Paul, places like Maine, where we now have ICE as well, you're seeing neighbors organizing for each other. You're seeing people turn out to feed each other, to try and protect children, to try and, I was just reading something today from a guy who drove to Texas to move, to carry immigrants back to Minneapolis after they had been released in Texas. He's like, I'm not leaving these people down there. As long as you take them down there, I'm going to drive them back. That kind of organization is not just about ICE. It's not just about politics. It's not just about democracy and the idea that this is our country. It is the idea that we are all in this together in a community, and we believe in creating a world that is fair and that is just. And I mean that economically, and I mean that legally. And it's one thing for someone like me to talk a lot about Abraham Lincoln, right, or Teddy Roosevelt. It's a hell of a lot more important when neighbors in Minnesota are saying, you're not going to treat our neighbors that way, and we're going to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's really what American democracy is about. And it's working. It is working. The fact that J.D. Vance felt he had to go back to Minnesota and walk back some of his more extreme statements that were designed to gin up anger on the part of their base, and that he has to walk that back, that says this is working. And so if you think about the ways to continue pushing back, always the things I say, show up at the local level, your school boards, your town halls, show up at the state level, get out there working for state judges that you think are important, or sheriff's offices, or the different places that your values are not being represented. And certainly raise hell among Congress critters, especially the Republicans, and the fact that they are not speaking up about Trump's threats to other countries, about his own apparent decomposition in front of our eyes. Those things are their job, and they're not doing it. And other Congress people, by the way, are speaking out. They are calling them out. It doesn't get a lot of press because Trump is taking so much oxygen, but they are calling them out. So speak up on all those levels. But There are so many organizations now doing really good work with food banks, with helping Ukraine, with education, with doing all the things that we need to demonstrate in the world to create the world that we want. Find one. And if it turns out there isn't one in your neighborhood, and there almost certainly is, but if there isn't, make one. And there are plenty of organizations that are already out there that will help you do that. Going forward into 2026, we must protect the right to vote. You can already see Trump is talking about a new SAVE Act, which is what they call the act that's designed to require people to show paperwork proving they're American citizens in order to vote. It is already a law that you have to be an American citizen to vote. The incidence of non-citizen voting is it virtually doesn't exist. But he wants to do that, obviously, because a lot of people cannot put their hands on a document proving that they are American citizens. And for many women, their birth certificates have a different name on them than their current names. This is a way to get rid of the population that tends to vote Democratic, as women do by a large gap over men. You can see he's already trying to figure out ways to rig the vote. So if you don't know where you want to end up putting some of your time, put it into the voting rights organizations that are out there. And there are so many of them, I'm not going to start articulating which ones they are because I'll leave somebody out, and that always freaks me out. But you can put your oar in there and figure out where you're going to be in this moment to speak up, not only for American democracy, although that is obviously what the line is now between American democracy and fascism, American democracy and authoritarianism, American democracy and oligarchy. That's where we are right now. It is not about politics, but it's not only about that, about reclaiming democracy. It's also about humanity. It's about community. It's about, what do we want our government to do for us? Like, I'm real keen on healthcare and education. Maybe that's not your thing. Whatever your thing is, what do you want the government to do? And once you figure that out, find an organization that's doing that and that will help us create a new world. Because it really does feel, we're in the thick of it now. For those of you who've been listening to me for a while, we knew this was coming. We knew the beginning of 2026 was going to be a expletive show, right? We knew that was going to happen, and we're in it. It is that. It's happening. People are getting hurt. People are getting killed. It is bad news. But it's also an opportunity to rebuild a world. And when you look at what's happening in Minnesota, when you look at, Mark Carney standing up at Davos yesterday, the Prime Minister of Canada, was it only yesterday? Maybe it was 2 days ago, saying we can build a better world. The United States of America has more than 340 million people in it. We got a lot of weight if we just are willing to use it. And that is not just about voting in 2026, although please make sure you're registered to vote. It is also about manifesting those changes we want to see. And you might feel like you're only one person and there's not a lot you can do. Find a friend, and then find 2 more friends. And pretty soon you've got a base group of, 100 people, 200 people who can get out there and, turn some issue in your community around. And that's how you create change. And it is working. If it weren't working, J.D. Vance would not have gone to Minnesota today. All right, a couple of pieces of news here from me. One is that I have the world's best comms person. She came on board a few months ago. Hi, Lauren. And she pointed out to me that many people would rather hear this as a podcast than see it. So she is about to turn these politics chats into podcasts. Nothing will change for anybody who wants them the way they are. But for those who would rather listen to it, she's going to make that magically happen. I don't know what that looks like, but that's out there. And I will be doing an interview tomorrow with Carol Leonnig and Aaron Davis, who are two journalists, two Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. I did an event with them a few months ago. They had 5 Prizes between the two of them. Boy, let me tell you, when you're sitting on a stage with two people who have 5 Prizes between the two of them, you feel like a real weenie. But anyway, I will be talking to them about Jack Smith's testimony and what we have learned from it and from the report and from his investigation into Trump's attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 election. That is Friday. Saturday morning is Joanne Freeman at 10:30. And then next week, I have a bunch of really cool interviews lined up, I think. And then I actually don't know what the schedule looks like from then on. But there's a lot going on. And like I say, it's going to be rough. It is going to be rough for the next several months at the very least. Take care of yourselves, drink enough water, get exercise, and get enough sleep. You're going to need it. But for all that it's going to be rough, look at the helpers, around you, and look at the things that are going right, because there are more of them right now than I think we have the time to cover. So keep the faith, and I will see you again Saturday, if not before. Thanks for being here.